Hi, this is Sally Morgan, physical therapist, craniosacral therapist, and Tellington T-Touch practitioner for animals and people. And this is Tristan. He's a Corgi. And we're here for another episode of Conversations with a Corgi. And today is a special day because I'm going to be talking about dogs and altruism. And it's a really interesting topic, and I am really fascinated and have been all my life of stories of animals doing remarkable things to help people and other animals. And to me, this is incredibly fascinating material. And for years, it was ruled out as just some kind of aberrant behavior and that animals weren't smart enough to have morals. And what we're finding, thanks to many brilliant researchers' work to prove otherwise, is that animals have rich, complex, and deep emotional lives, and therefore they are completely capable of exhibiting what we call altruism. And altruism, for those of you who are not familiar with the term or need clarification, is when you do something to benefit others at risk to yourself. It's an unselfish concern for others. And of course, dogs and wolves come from a very social, relationship-based community together. And of course, they would exhibit behavior that would be unselfish towards themselves in order to help others in their group. And in fact, there have been some recent studies to prove just this. And we have found that dogs exhibit levels of empathy and caring and giving similar to that found in humans, and especially for a dog that another dog knows, because they tested that in a particular study. And of course, we now know that dogs exhibit what they call pro-social behavior, and many of the apes, and in fact most mammals, exhibit what they call pro-social behavior, which is being nice to others. It's doing something to benefit the group that may be at risk to yourself, or just something simple as like leading the group to food for the entire group instead of selfishly keeping it to yourself. A study in Vienna in 2015 showed that when a dog had an opportunity to pull a string and give a treat to another dog, as opposed to just giving him an empty tray, the dog chose most of the time to give the treat to the other dog. And if it was a dog he knew, he really increased his likelihood to give that dog a treat. And of course, at the end of the study, the dog had the opportunity to give himself a treat as well, but it was only after he had given a treat to the dog next to him. And this is really important because we're seeing that dogs really care about each other. They have rich emotional lives. They are connected to each other in their friend groups, their pack groups, their households. And it's really important that we recognize this because it will change how we relate to our animals. We will be ourselves more altruistic in our handling of them. Dogs are always trying hard to do the best they can. And if we ignore their signals, like the dog sitting down on the leash and refusing to walk, if we ignore that signal, we're ignoring the only way the dog has to communicate with us. And we are not respecting their individuality and their intelligence and their relationship to us. So it's really important that we learn to listen to the signals from our dogs, which may be so subtle, just a change in posture. Yesterday, Tristan was greeting a new dog, and I saw, he seemed fine for about 2 minutes, and then I saw him get stiff, and I pulled him away because it was a puppy, and I didn't want him to be barking up the puppy. And Tristan is very bossy with puppies, and I know that, but I just saw a second when he started to shift his posture, and so I was able to pull him away. And, you know, he would play with that puppy and be nice if they weren't both on a leash. But it's really important that we be aware of our dog's signals to us. And they aren't so simple as just looking at a chart on the wall with a bunch of dogs' body posture. Of course, that's a good place to start, but it is not the be-all and end-all. Every dog is an individual, and we all know our own dogs well. So it's important that we recognize the signals from our own specific dogs. And people question whether dogs giving other dogs treats in this study was from years of domestication and being around the altruistic humans, or was it something genetic in their species because they are associated with wolves. And researchers in that study concluded that dogs and wolves both exhibit cooperative and social behaviors, and so we can assume that they have what we call pro-social behavior, which is a feeling of being well-being and looking out for the group. And of course, we've seen this with rabbits and prairie dogs. You know, the prairie dogs will squeak when they see an intruder or a hawk flying overhead, and they'll all go into their holes. And rabbits have a thump that they do to warn other rabbits in the area when there's an intruder or danger. And even domestic rabbits that I've had outside in the yard, if a hawk flies overhead, will give that same warning to the wild rabbits nearby. So it doesn't even need to be in a group for a rabbit to do that. And in fact, other reports of animals being altruistic include a 2010 report of 2 humpback whales that swam into a pack of killer whales, which is in fact their natural predator, to save a seal. The seal was clinging to an iceberg and trying desperately to survive, and the killer whales were pounding and pounding on the seal's iceberg, trying to get him into the water so they could eat him. And the 2 humpback whales flew in there, and just as the seal's iceberg gave up, one of the whales put his belly up and carried the seal to safety and allowed him to rest so that he could then carry on and find a safe place to be. And this is incredible because killer whales are the natural predator of humpback whales. They are not necessarily wanting to interact with them in a way to save a seal. But this is another example of that unselfish behavior, taking a risk to help another. And we see that all over the animal world, but especially with dogs. And dolphins, there's many, many stories of dolphins rescuing other sea life that have been caught in nets, rescuing dogs and people that have been fallen overboard from their boats, and also rescuing dogs and people from sharks. Many, many, many stories of dolphins doing amazing things in spite of the way that we've treated them for centuries. And the same with whales. Of course, there are also stories of rats. Rats have done amazing things to help other rats, and they're doing lots of studies now with rats. You know, a mother rat, for instance, walking over an electrified grid to move her babies to safety. And also rats helping other rats, giving up the opportunity to eat chocolate, which they adore, in order to help another rat who is in distress. So it's really interesting that rats, which we don't think much about as being very higher thinking, rats are incredibly, incredibly intelligent if you research them. And they exhibit levels of altruism comparable to ours and dogs. And in fact, in humans, about 1 in 2,000 people is altruistic enough to want to give a kidney to someone who needs one. And they have no real explanation. They are, you know, when you ask them, why did you give a kidney? It wasn't because I want to feel good about helping someone. They have nothing to say. Someone needed it and I did it. So there's people who have that level of altruism, all the way down to the other end of the scale where we get people that are psychotic and shooting groups of people. So we are not always as altruistic as we'd like to think we are, but there is some evidence that we are evolving and becoming more altruistic. And in fact, when we see the news, and maybe the news is creating this, people are becoming very distressed about hearing about groups of people in other parts of the world that are subjected to, you know, environmental situations or war, famine, things like that. And we care, even if we don't send money or if we don't call to donate something, we do care. And particularly, for instance, when we have something like Hurricane Katrina in the United States, people went out of their way to really help people because they are part of our group. They're in our country. We have been to their state. We might know people that know them. We might know people that are from that area. And so we are much more likely, as our dogs, to do an altruistic act to benefit people that we consider in our group. And of course, we used to believe that altruism was a higher cognitive function, meaning that it came from a sense of morality and doing good in the world. But in fact, these studies with dogs and rats and other mammals are showing us that, in fact, altruism is not cognitive, it's emotional. And people have been shown who have altruistic behavior, like those who have donated kidneys to strangers, to have a larger amygdala in their brain. That's part of the limbic system, part of the emotional center of the brain. And in fact, in animals, the amygdala, particularly in mammals, is well developed and larger than in non-mammalian species, and particularly in cooperative groups of animals like horses and dogs and rats that live in colonies and animals like that. And in fact, this idea that the amygdala is bigger is still being researched to see more about levels of altruism in chimps and apes and dogs and people and rats in particular, because they're so easy to study. So what we're finding now is actual evidence to support the idea that animals have rich and deep and complex emotional lives. And we have to thank Karl Safinaz, who wrote a great book about emotions in animals that came out maybe 2 years ago. And I really highly recommend it. I forget what the first part of the book, but it's called The Emotional Lives of Animals in its subtitle. And I can't recommend that book enough. He looks at a pod of humpback whales, or no, killer whales. He looks at some wolves. He looks at his own dogs. He looks at studies that we have made about animals and cognition and emotions. And elephants, he looks at, there's elephants on the cover. And it's really just a fascinating book, and it just makes me and others like me grateful, because finally he's supporting what we've known from being with our animals all of our lives. And finally there's somebody doing research to prove what we can see in plain sight every day if we choose to look. And bonobo is one of my favorite species. They look like small black chimps. They're pretty endangered, and they're in small parts of the world. And there's other books I have read about people that have gone to look at the bonobos and study them, and they are one of the most pro-social groups of mammals on the planet. And they will even raise some babies from their enemies, and they are good at taking care of each other's young in their group, and they are a matriarchal society, and they are very kind to each other in their group. They have very little fighting and very little stress, and when there is stress, everyone engages in sexual activity to release the stress in the group, which is interesting. Not many animals are like that. One study of dogs suggests that play is not practice fighting and practice hunting, but that is in fact an opportunity to learn about rich social cues and ways to learn cooperation and social codes within the group. So notice that when your puppies or your dogs are playing, does it really look like fighting, or are they teaching each other what the word no means and what the word yes means, and are they playing tag, and are they learning each other's body cues about what they want and need? Because that really is what's going on. They are not fighting, and they are not practicing to pounce on a mouse. They are truly engaging with one another and learning from each other how to interact with, well, particularly with dogs, not just with other dogs, but with cats and people as well. They have noticed that one dog rescue, they have put out a line of food like you would feed chickens, as opposed to putting out a bunch of bowls, as an experiment to see how the dogs would interact with each other and if that would cut down on a little of the fighting and stress at dinner time. And what they have found is remarkable. By putting out a lot of food in a row, all of the dogs eat the food at their station, and they don't disrupt the other dogs. And when a new dog comes, they've noticed that some of the larger dogs and the stronger dogs in the group will protect the smaller and younger dogs, or the sick dogs, and allow them to have a space next to them so that they can be safe when they're eating. It's really interesting what they're doing at this particular dog rescue. And they have found that they have almost no fights and fewer problems at feeding. And they've also noticed that the dogs are starting to exhibit behaviors where the dogs that are healthier and stronger are taking care of the younger or sicker or weaker or new dogs in the group, which is again an example of dogs being altruistic and showing compassion for others in their species. There is a book by Frans de Waal called The Bonobo and the Atheist. He was a researcher at Emory University. He's still there, actually. And he went and looked at bonobos, who are some of the most altruistic of animals on the planet. And he concluded that mammals have a genetic, wired impulse to help those in need. And in fact, that's what we've seen with our dogs. And there are so many, hundreds of stories of dogs risking their own lives to go into a burning building to get their person, or to tell someone where their person is. There are stories and stories of dogs and a person who have been hit by a car, and the dog going on, 3 legs with one severely broken to get help for their person who's mortally injured. There have been dogs staying with people who have had strokes and heart attacks, or barking and barking till the neighbors come to help them. I mean, there are just hundreds of stories of dogs doing remarkable things to help people. And in fact, many, many dogs have raised babies of species that are not related to them, and this includes kittens and baby elephants even. Dogs have spent hundreds of hours nurturing animals of other species to bring them health and well-being, and there are many, many examples that you can find on the internet of dogs with other species that they have raised and befriended and become close to, because dogs have a tendency to want to be altruistic and to help others. They want to help others because of their cooperative lives in their packs and their groups. And as I said, only 1 in 2,000 people will choose to donate a kidney to a stranger. Of course, that number goes way up when it's someone you know or you're related to. So dogs are remarkable animals, and I think we are indeed fortunate to be able to spend our lives with them and to be able to share some of their genius in expanding our own abilities. Dogs caring for other animals and caring for each other and caring for us is a remarkable gift to us. And many people with service dogs can report times when their dogs have done amazing things to help them. When I had a really bad fall from a horse once, I was very upset. I was in shock, and I knew I was going to be in shock, and I was working my ears, but I was really in bad shape. So I was calling my dog, Winston, my first Corgi, to come to me because I knew the warmth of his body would help keep me at a more steady state, because I had a lot going on with my injuries. And instead what he did was chase my horse up and down the fence line, barking, 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 barking. And what was it that helped me? Him barking. The people at the farmhouse, which was probably a half a mile away from where I was in the pasture, having fallen from my horse, heard him barking and knew something was wrong, and there were no lights on in the barn, so they knew I wasn't out there like grooming the horse, and they came running out and they found me and got me to safety because I was unable to walk at the time. So again, that's just one example of one dog who was able to help me. Now, was Winston thinking altruistically? He was somewhat hurting the horse, but there were 3 other horses in another pasture that he could have hurted. He wasn't hurting them. He was hurting my horse and chasing him back and forth up and down the fence line. And certainly the people in the farmhouse saw the horse running too and knew something was not right. So it's very interesting what dogs will do for us. And I have many examples in my book, Dances of the Heart, Connecting with Animals, of things that animals in my life have done to exhibit altruism and their emotional connections to us. So let's spend today in gratitude that dogs are in our lives and that they do so many remarkable things to help us every single day. And let's try to be nicer to them and exhibit some altruism towards them, helping them and protecting them and feeding them good food and keeping them safe, because dogs are really remarkable beings, and we are so, so very fortunate that they choose to be with us. Right, Tris? Tristan's wearing his bandana with Labradors today to show that he cares about other dogs. So this is Sally Morgan and Tristan Corgi, and we have been talking today about dogs and altruism and the remarkable ability that animals have to exhibit compassion and empathy for others who are in distress. And of course, even when they aren't in distress, I have seen animals be amused by others playing. Like I've seen my horse look at baby horses playing and take a lot of interest in them and not want to walk away, because it's kind of like he's looking at them like, aren't they cute? Aren't they lucky? I remember when I was a baby, that kind of thing. So our animals really contribute so much to our lives, and we are so lucky that they share time with us. So think about the emotional life of your dog and spend some time with your dog today, connecting with him. And do check out Karl Safinaz's great book about animals and emotions. It's a really wonderful book, and he is a brilliant researcher. And he's well known for his work studying oceanography and ocean animals. And he's a lovely man. I've talked to him on the internet, and he's wonderful. So check out his book. So this is Sally Morgan and Tristan Corgi talking about dog altruism today. Have a great Sunday, everyone. Bye-bye. we'll see you on Wednesday this week, because I am at my educator job for the next couple of days. So we will be back on Wednesday and we'll be talking about chakras. Oh, busy. Sneezy Corgi. See you on Wednesday.